Hello, and welcome once again to the Brown Initiative for Discipleship and Evangelism. My name is Ethan Brown, and this is BIDE. This video is being produced in cooperation with the Partnership Program at the Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary, where I'm a student in the Outreach and Discipleship track of the D-Men program. If you'd like to learn more about the Partnership Program, or if you'd like to join with me in my endeavors, I'll leave a link where you can find more information in the description below. Over the last couple of days, I've had an experience that's new to me in that I have been working really hard to produce one of these BIDE videos and just not been satisfied at all. Not that I mean to imply that I think my BIDE videos are like amazing, but this one just was not working. The last episode that went live a couple of weeks ago was on a book by Timothy Keller on how to win the West again. And I took just a couple of pages out of that book and analyzed the American value system that's arising in this new America that you and I are living in. As we were thinking through the idea of the once and future reality of the church and how we now live in this post-Christian world. And what I wanted to do with the next video after that was to put together a video on how to help people discover that the American value system makes promises that it doesn't then deliver on. That if you look at the values that are there, they're being offered as a kind of way to form a good life and how to move forward as a human being in this world without the Christian faith and still live a rewarding and fulfilling and ultimately flourishing existence. And the truth is that those things don't lead to that, like at all. The American value system promises that, but it doesn't get there. So I've been trying to put together a video to help my listeners think about that. How would I help someone who is currently embracing that value system to discover that it's not keeping its promise to you and that you're going to struggle with it? Well, I still intend to make that video probably next after this one. But the problem that I was developing is a problem that I think we run into a lot in evangelism, that we discover that we become almost manipulative in our efforts to lead people to Jesus. And if there's one thing that evangelism, if it's genuine, just never can be, it's manipulative. Authentic evangelism flows from authentic compassion and authentic concern, genuine love for the person that you're reaching out to. What I found that I was doing was something that felt very much like something I would really like my videos to offer a correction to. And that is, I felt like I was equipping people to win a fight. You can't win a person and a fight. You can win one of those two, but you won't win both of them. People rarely ever change their mind because they lost a fight. Some people do. If you have a lot of integrity, and if you have a lot of kind of an analytical approach in your mind and to the world, and if you have maybe a lot of devotion to truth, then if you got persuaded that you were wrong and you saw the truth more clearly, then you might shift your ground. But I'll suggest to you that's a small percentage of people. That most of us, when we lose a fight, we double down on what we believed before. So if I'm equipping you to go out and do what I think Timothy Keller's done a really good job in his little book, equipping people to do, and that is to think through the promises made by our culture, and then to help people question the answers that they've arrived at. The solution to my problem is this, and that's the answer I've got. Well, before you can help people come up with questions about the gospel, you usually have to help them come up with questions about the gospel they've given to themselves, their own good news, the truth that they've come to believe, the things that they've invested in that aren't in fact gospel or truth or worthy of their investment because they don't work. Well, if I equip you to do that, then I'm equipping you to have a discussion that's way deep down in the friendship level. And generally, it's a place that if you have it too soon, it's going to be a fight. And you might win that fight, but lose the person. And what I felt in my own heart as I was watching the videos that I'd shot was, my goodness, I'm equipping people maybe to be twice as much a son of hell as myself. Rather than helping you to come to love, am I helping you to come into something that is broken in, I think, the way that most of us think of evangelism, and maybe even broken some in myself. I really didn't like it. So I've scrapped all those videos, and I went into a time of contemplation before picking up the camera again to shoot this one, to say, okay, what's missing here? Let me introduce you to another book. It's by a guy named Sam Chan, and it's called How to Talk About Jesus Without Being That Guy. Nobody wants to be that guy. So I've actually already introduced you to a book by Sam Chan. It was called Evangelism for a Skeptical World. And that was the book that first introduced me to the idea of plausibility structures and put me on to Peter Berger. This is honestly, I kind of was hesitant to read this one because I thought the title was a little goofy. I'm glad I did, though. It really is an excellent book. In fact, I would suggest it's a little bit better in terms of practicality than Evangelism for a Skeptical World. The Skeptical World book evaluates a lot more heady things like culture and how we are where we are. And the ideas of how to be persuasive. This book focuses on evangelism through friendship. When I was younger, back in the 1980s, so I guess quite a lot younger, there was this kind of a thrust on friendship evangelism. I was taught the method of evangelism that was called friendship evangelism. Well, I like both of those things. I like being friendly and I like having friends. And I like, trying to persuade people to give commitment and allegiance to Jesus. So you would think I would like friendship evangelism, but even as a 16-year-old, I found friendship evangelism, as it was kind of promoted and trained in my church, to be, is appalling the right word? It seemed to me, and I didn't have the words for this back then, but I'm articulating the emotions that I remembered. It seemed to me that it was taking things that ought to be treated as almost sacred, things that were kind of ends, not means. This is not a way to get something done. This is a thing to get done. And it seemed to me that it was treating friendship as if it were a means to do something else. And while evangelism is an incredibly important end, it seemed to me, anyway, that friendship was itself an end. It was something that God wanted us to do and to be that was it would perhaps include the idea of evangelism, but it wouldn't be a means to get to evangelism, because that's inherently manipulative. It's almost like the idea of marriage evangelism. Marriage is a relationship that is far too significant and important and kind of its own thing to do so that you can accomplish evangelism. Now, if you're married and you come to faith and your spouse hasn't, okay, well, maybe you're in a situation where your marriage becomes a means of evangelism to that spouse. But that's not why you got into it. And that was the problem with friendship evangelism, is that it seemed to me anyway, these are the memories of a teenage boy, an old man reflecting back on that. But as I thought about friendship evangelism, it seemed to me it was like, go make friends so that you can trick them into believing in Jesus through that friendship. And then if they come to believe in Jesus, then you'll have a real friendship. But it was the idea of being friendly in order to be an effective evangelist. Now, that's certainly an improvement, I suppose, over certain models of evangelism that were popular in my childhood that I didn't much care for. The door-knocking, confrontational style of evangelism. I think this was kind of meant to be hey, maybe we can fix that by doing something better. Maybe if we're friendly, that'd be a better idea. But I think the problem was that it just hadn't really reached the point where it had moved evangelism out of salesmanship and actually into that realm of authentic love that evangelism is really kind of supposed to be. I think that Sam Chan's book, How to Talk About Jesus, is trying to train us to become friends with people so that we will be their friends. It is trying to undo the evangelical subculture in America that has increasingly said, okay, well, if you're different from me, and if you believe differently from me, then I really shouldn't be your friend, because your different beliefs are a threat to my value system. It's a threat to the society I live in, and you're the bad leaven, and I really shouldn't be your friend. So I might extend something that's like friendship in a ploy to get you to become like me and to evangelize you. But I'm not going to be your friend and really go deep anywhere with you unless you and I are on the same page. Well, this book suggests, forget that. Don't do that. That's not a healthy evangelical perspective. It's not a healthy Christian perspective. It's not a healthy faithful perspective. The truth is that God expects us to love people. And this book is almost a primer on becoming friends with your non-Christian potential friends. How do you come to love them? Now, how is this a book on evangelism? Well, it assumes that you're a Christian and that talking about Jesus is something you kind of do because Jesus is the most important thing in your life. And so you don't make friendships so that you can evangelize. You make real, genuine friendships because you are a Christian. And if you are a Christian, then your real, genuine friends might also eventually enter into conversation with you where you can talk about Jesus. And you will always be prepared to do that with the people that you come to love. This book is filled with really fascinating advice that should be unnecessary. Things like, if you want your friends to come to church, then that's one of your things. If you want them to respond positively when you invite them to your things, go to their things. If you are friends with a Muslim and they invite you to go to the mosque, go to the mosque. You discover what it is that is important in your friend's life. And who knows but that conversation that will come out of you having been a Christian who attended the mosque with a Muslim might lead to the point where you can discuss deep things, issues of values, and even deeper than values, your core beliefs, your driving fundamental beliefs. But you'll never get there until you are able to talk in a shallow way. A lot of people just despise small talk. But small talk is a real thing. It's a skill that's valuable. The ability to be able to talk about the weather and about your children and what your children are doing and asking about their children. The ability to talk about sports or movies or books you've read. These things, generally speaking, are not going to shift someone's thinking. It's not going to be a worldview shifting reality. But they are friendly and they are relationship building. And in fact, they are trust building. If you are doing what I long ago called wild evangelism, where you encounter the wild blueberry, you have the opportunity that springs up to talk about Jesus with someone that you don't even know. You're going to be doing something that is relationally just a bit odd. Strangers sometimes can get away with this, where you jump all the way down to that core belief region, that deepest part of me, that part of me that is really dangerous for you to poke on because it would hurt. But that I'm trying to invest my real self into, the things that I'm really trying to build my life around. For me, what's down there is Jesus. That's really where that center is. For the non-Christian living in this culture, it's going to be issues of identity or issues of justice or of my personal morality. Those are the things that are way down in there. Well, if I'm out in the wild, I might find myself discussing matters that hit that point really, really quickly. But that's relationally unusual. A person you sit by on an airplane ride, if they're open to it, you might end up in that kind of discussion. And they're trying to persuade you to become a Muslim while you're trying to persuade them to become a Christian. And you might have a really fascinating and deep discussion. But with your neighbor that you see every day, if you go straight there, you're doing something that's almost relationally and emotionally inappropriate. The chances are good that you're opening up the door to a pretty big conflict, a fight. If you go straight into matters of identity, for instance, with someone who is invested deeply in an identity, that would make it difficult for them to become a Christian because they've embraced things that perhaps the core of their identity is to be an atheist, or to invest deeply in some, sexual practice that Jesus doesn't approve. If you start the discussion there, well, you may see that neighbor from time to time. They might even occasionally wave at you. But the idea that you will ever get very deep with that person is not very high. You've demonstrated that you want to win fights. You're not really interested in winning souls. You're not really interested in making friends. You're not really interested in loving them as they are and willing to allow them to be whomever it is that they want to be. Jesus, when he encountered the rich young guy who had the great wealth, he saw him, he answered his questions, and he loved him. And he called to him the same way he called to Matthew, the tax collector, or Simon, the fisherman. He called to that rich guy, but you don't know his name. And the reason you don't know his name, and there's never been like a flannel board cut out to throw up to teach children about him, is because he walked away from Jesus, and Jesus let him. Jesus offered friendship to the guy, and the guy turned him down. But Jesus allowed him to be who he was. One of the things about Christians that sometimes we need to learn from the Lord is that if our goals are more important than the people we love, then our goals are wrong. We have to love people as people, whether they ever come to agree with us or not, whether they embrace the way that we understand to lead to eternal life or not. God loves them as they are, and we have to too. Now, we need to be able to talk to people about Jesus. If we want to be able to evangelize, we need to do that. But we don't love them so that we can do that. We do that because we love Jesus. Sam Chan, in his book, talks about a three-layer strategy for dealing with our friends when it seems like they're willing to go deeper with us. He ties those three things to three different activities that we can do. He talks about coffee, he talks about dinner, and he talks about gospel. And those are three different activities that have to do with three different layers of us as selves, where we engage with our friends at different parts of us and at different parts of them. So at the coffee level, he talks about getting together for coffee because it's a low-level investment. Just about anybody I can spend 20 minutes with, even someone that, this isn't going to work out. We don't jive well together. We're not going to be close friends. But I can talk to you for 20 minutes. A cup of coffee is a low investment. If you'd rather have a cup of tea, you can do that. But we're talking about, just sitting down and having a conversation. Now, what do people talk about over coffee? Well, when the relationship is new, you tend to talk about interests. If you really love Star Wars, except for what Disney did with them, or if you really love the Disney Star Wars and don't understand all the haters, that's the layer of interests. You could talk about your favorite sports teams, or you could talk about the big boxing match that you saw last month on pay-per-view. Maybe you talk about politics or fashion or something, something that your kids are involved in, their play that's coming out next week. This is the level of interests where you're dealing with things that are important to me, but they're not real deep. If you disagree with me about Star Wars, so what? We can laugh together about that disagreement. And we're both okay. And you're not going to storm off, and neither do I. That's the layer of coffee. The next layer that Chan discusses is the layer of dinner. Dinner is a bigger investment. If I'm going to have dinner with you, I'm going to have you over into my home, or I'm going to go over to yours, carrying a dessert. And that means our relationship has reached the point where maybe it's not so awkward. It might be a little scary, but we've come to know one another well enough that we can do that. And we sit together for an hour or even two. And if it's going great, maybe even 3. You break out the cards and you start having a really good time. At this layer, we are significantly deeper than we were before, and we start maybe talking more about values. I mentioned politics a moment ago, and that might be at the layer of interests, but it's generally not, because that is down more at a layer that people really invest themselves more deeply in, and it comes to mean more to a lot of people. Now, some people are apolitical, and they could talk about politics, and they don't care. But some people, for politics, that's matters of justice. And matters of justice are a core value. And we're talking about something that's a whole lot deeper than just the issue of my kids' play. My kids themselves are deeper, but my interest in what they're doing might be something that's safe for us to talk about, because you're not going to be able to set me off by your opinion about that, unless you're like super rude or something. You're not going to be. That layer of values is deeper down, where I'm exposing much more of my personal self to you. The interests are kind of my public self, but this is my more personal self. And we've gotten to know each other well enough that we'll spend more time, we'll invest more deeply in each other. And the conversation more naturally flows here. Now, if things go well here, then we may get to the point where eventually we can talk about worldview. And when we get there, that's where I will discuss the Word of God. I will share Word of God. Stories about Jesus will start coming out of me once I get to my worldview, because He's what's down there for me. When you get down to that deep level, what is it that guides my real decisions? What is it, the issues of how I live in my family and what kind of family I want to have. When I was getting married, what was it that was, He was guiding that, and guiding her too. He was more important to Ashley than I am. Jesus was, and Jesus cared a lot more. She cared a lot more about Jesus than she cared about me, which I'm very grateful for. Part of the reason that she was drawn to me is she saw that same worldview in me, and we were drawn together that way. Well, that's intimate. Talking about how I picked my spouse, now my spouse picked me. How do I think that a real worthwhile life, something that's really meaningful to me, will be lived? That's down at that deep, deep level. And we'll only get there if our friendship proceeds to that point, and it's clear that my friend is willing and interested in getting there. Now, I may need to ask some questions. I may need to ask questions that motivate us to go there, to see if they're willing to do it with me. And to ask, what do you think about God? Or what do you think that you are? Do you think that there's any part of you that's immaterial? That's a weird question, and I wouldn't ask it if we were talking about Star Wars. Although, if we've had that work, we've gone through coffee, and we've had that work where we've had dinner, then Star Wars may be a place that I could bounce off of to ask about. There's the Force in there. What do you think that is? And what do you think really that's talking about? Is there any correlating reality? What do you think you are? Well, what do you think makes you what you are? Is there any immaterial part of you like the Force? And that might lead us into a deeper discussion that would get down at that level of worldview. And the reason all this is important to me is because it offers me, I think, a corrective for what I was trying to do in my other videos. I realize you haven't seen them. But what I was trying to do is to equip someone to be able to have that deepest layer of conversation. How do I get to the point where I can ask someone questions about their identity? The identity that they're choosing to have, and how is it fulfilling to you? Or your pursuit of happiness, that you can't let anybody, you can't sacrifice your happiness for anybody. Well, how's that working out? Are you building the kind of relationships that you want by that approach to happiness? Or the interlocking realities of justice and morality? If we all make up our own morality, then why can't we make up our own justice? Because justice is morality based. They link together at the social level, but they're about doing what's right. Both of them are. Doing what's right as a person versus doing what's right as a society. Well, how can I know justice if I make up my own morality and you make up yours? How do we link up together to have a shared justice if we have different moralities? Those kinds of questions are useful, but boy, are they not great places to start. In the increasingly secularized world that you and I live in and that our children are likely to live in, those kinds of questions are going to be things that we have to ask of our friends. But first, they need to be our friends. Truth is that everybody deserves to have a Christian friend. Like a genuine Christian friend, whether they're a Christian or not. Someone who will love them and maybe even love them enough to say things like, "Are you sure you want to do that? I don't know that you're going to like how that works out." Or, I know that you really feel driven by that, but what's that doing to your relationships? I mean, someone who is a real friend and has the cred, there's kind of relationship credit with that other person to be able to say that kind of thing to them. You can't do that with a stranger. And if you don't have a Christian advising you, then you're going to not be getting any Christian advice. And if Jesus is the wisest man that ever lived, everybody deserves exposure to that kind of wisdom. But, boy, that means maybe Christians need to get a good bit better at being friendly. Or more important, being friends. God loved the world, and Jesus loved the world. And when I look at Jesus, his whole strategy was to go around making friends with people, spending time with them, investing with them, spending day after day after day, getting together and having coffee and eating meals, spending all that time together with those people. And he's such a good friend. Wouldn't it be great if we were too? Because if we are really friends with somebody, then they're going to care about us. Because they know we care about them. And if they care about us, they'll care about the things that we care about. And we care about Jesus. And maybe we can start talking to them about Jesus without being that guy. And that's kind of something we really ought to be about. Because God so loved the world that he sent Jesus. And Jesus sent us for the honor of Christ and for the life of the world.